We're playing things so fast and loose now, Rach, that I'm just like, yeah, whatever, let's start recording. It's great. So it's like no formal introduction apart from saying
Hi, everyone, if there's anyone listening. Yeah.
we hope there's someone listening. We think there are people listening because we do get some feedback.
We have had some feedback. So I think I overrode you saying you're Sophie Green and I'm Rachael Johns.
Oh no, what I actually said was hello, Rachael Johns.
Oh, okay. Well, hello, Sophie Green.
I thought I'd just try to be formal, once in a blue moon, go for the formality, because we're meant to be professionals of some sort, but we're professional writers, not professional.
It doesn't mean we're professional podcasters. You made me think about something else we should possibly speak about one day. I don't know if it's a whole episode, but pseudonyms or writing names.
Ah, okay. Well, you're noting it down. I'm noting it down. We do have a list of subjects to address, and we have some guests coming up as well.
Yeah, I'm so excited.
Yes, I'm excited because it's always interesting to talk to other people. Not that I'm not interested in talking to you, but it's good for listeners to hear other people's perspectives. But today it's going to be our perspectives on the editorial process, and this is going to cover us while we write. So whether we self-edit, and then what the editorial process is like once we've delivered a manuscript and we're heading towards publication. Now, at the time we're talking, you're about to go on an overseas trip and you're hoping to complete an edit before you went. Have you completed that edit?
I was going to say, because I think we've recorded 2 this week because we had a guest. So it'll sound like my editing and going away is taking forever. But, I almost have completed it. I could have completed it, but today I've got today and tomorrow until I go away. And I have a list of, as you always do when you've, organized to go away. I've got a list of all the things I need to do before then. And today I have done a lot of those things. And one of the things is just do a final few tweaks on my editing. But I think I'm going to do that tomorrow. So I've been working today on getting through, all the other things. So yeah, I will have finished. I will send it off before I go. So that's nice that I reached that goal. Yeah,
it is. And we will talk about the editorial production side of things, as in, and by that I mean what happens once your manuscript's in and it's heading for the printer. But I really like to know if you edit yourself as you're writing. And it's like writing that first draft or whatever the delivered draft is.
The short answer is absolutely yes. I may have spoken about this when we were talking about process, but I am not one of those people who can just charge ahead and write a first draft. I have done a few talks over the years. A couple of years ago, I did a number of events with Sally Hepworth and Lisa Ireland. And Sally and I always used to joke that she would do up to 20 drafts. So I guess that's self-editing really, but it's in like just getting one draft done and then going back and fixing something else, then going through and looking at something else. So she edits as she goes, I guess, but in a different way to me. So the way I do it is I can't really move forward unless I'm pretty happy with what I've got so far. So every day I will reread what I've done at least the day before, if not a lot more. And I've mentioned before following my gut. So if I feel stuck, some people then would just go, okay, hang on, why am I stuck? All right, well, I'm just going to keep charging on and I'll fix what I've done that's made me stuck, when I've done the first draft. But for me, my brain just doesn't work that way. So I am constantly editing what I've already done. And if I'm not happy with that, then I can't move forward. But that doesn't mean that I give a perfect draft, and I get to that maybe in a minute, in terms of there's always room for improvement, no matter how much editing you do yourself as you go. I think we're so close to stuff. And yeah, I mean, I may get to it in a minute, but I will say that I have just finished a structural edit, a fairly light structural edit. But I mentioned the other night when we were talking to Amanda Knight that my edit is full of red now because I use track changes once, so that the publisher and editor can see what I've done. I was told I didn't have to necessarily use it at this stage, but I find it quite useful. And then, you can see that so much of it is changed still. So even though I feel like what I'm giving is quite a clean, draft that I have thought over a lot myself, there's still a lot of room. So yeah, I'd say the short answer is yes, I edit as I go. What about you?
I absolutely do, but I didn't realize I did
Oh,
for quite a
really?
while. Yeah, I thought that I was just writing
Yeah.
until I hit a point where I was control Zing my way out of something. And because
Oh,
I
and
use
you
keyboard
realize.
shortcuts. Yeah, and I was like control Z. I thought I was just going back to a correction that I'd made a mere moment before. And it took several keystrokes for me to get back. I just thought, but in my brain, that was a change I literally just made, but obviously I had changed a lot since then. So
Wow.
I'm more likely to change on the line as I go than I am to make huge story changes. Having said that, it's possible I don't realize how much I'm doing of that either because I'm so deeply in it that
Yeah.
I'm more likely to be in there thinking I need to do this, I need to do that. Certainly with this year's book, Art Hour at the Duchess Hotel, because I'd started that many years ago and written quite a few words, and it was a very different story at that
Oh, I
time.
didn't know that.
Yeah, I started it in 2017, 2018, I think, and I wrote about 20,000 words, and it was quite different. It was quite a lot darker, but the character we opened with, Joan, was in it.
Yeah.
So I always wanted it to be Joan's story, but by mutual agreement, it had to be changed quite a lot. So I think I wasn't still hanging on to elements of that story, but I realized once I'd written quite a bit of the book that will be released that I had let go of too much, that in my efforts to move away from what I thought wasn't working, what the publisher had encouraged me to change.
Yeah.
And again, by mutual agreement, that I actually had lost a lot of what I thought that story was. So I actually needed to find a way
Then
to
you put it
get
back
that.
in.
Yeah.
I'm interested because
Not the
I would
darkness though.
say, what's that?
Not the darkness, but just, or not as much of it, but just to get her back to who she fundamentally was. I think that in an effort to change it so much, I'd actually lost sight of who that character fundamentally was.
Interesting. I'm interested that you like that control Z thing that you had changed so much. Like, was that on a, finding the right words and, because I feel like I don't know if I do that kind of editorial stuff. It's more like I feel like my last book, which I'm now actually doing structural edits for, which is Outback Reunion, it's a rural romance. I basically gave myself a structural edit, I reckon, at about 75,000 words. So I feel like I am probably editing more the more I write. Like, I think that the more books I write, the more I edit as I go, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, I'm
But
doing
yeah,
that too.
I don't think it's necessarily as like sentence level as possibly what you're describing. Although I do know, like, there's no greater joy than trying to work out what word you're doing, and then suddenly I will change a word sometimes when I go through the next day, and I'll be suddenly like, no, that's a much better word, and then it's so exciting. So I guess I do change things on a more micro level as well as a macro. Yeah.
I'm not sure that we're even conscious of what we're doing.
No, I think you're probably right.
Yes, and I'm like you. The more books I've written, the more editing I've done before it's delivered. And
does that mean you've slowed down in how long a first draft takes?
I think a little bit, but
Okay.
again, hard to gauge because I don't have much time. Like you have less time than I do because you're writing 2 books a year.
Oh no, but I don't have another full-time job. So,
but your
I think
deadlines would
I
be
think it evens out, really. Probably is about the same.
Anyway, we could argue the toss.
We can argue about that.
I still think that in terms of actual dates in your diary, things are stacking up faster for you than they're stacking up for me.
Yeah, I suppose that whole time thing. But it's true. Like I do feel like I do take longer now to write a first draft, but I don't think it's just the writing now when I think about it, because when I first started writing books, I wasn't published, so I didn't have a lot of the stuff that comes with being published. But also, as we've spoken about before, when I first got published, there was literally only Facebook. We weren't expected to do all the extra stuff. When you first get published, especially back then, I feel like, there wasn't a lot, I wasn't doing a lot of events, and maybe that's because I had young children and I was in the country, but I do think maybe that there's been even more of a push towards events, and maybe that's because of social media as well. Like, people are seeing, so I feel like as a debut author, you maybe do more, from what I'm trying to say, as you did when I was a debut author.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, so I feel like there's a lot of reasons why I take slightly longer. And one of them is the editing. Probably as I go, I probably am more aware of things that I wasn't noticing originally. So I just wrote with pure, like, less voices in my head, and probably did less self-edit as I went. But the more I do, the more I self-edit as I go, there's more voices in my head, and also there's a whole load of other things that I have to do and fit in as well. Yeah.
Do you think also the more books you've written, because they've all been so successful, the expectations that you perhaps put on yourself, but also perceived expectations from the publisher, mean maybe you're taking longer because you're like, oh, well, there are a lot of people looking at this now and I need to make sure I get it right?
Yeah, I do think that's a possibly more of a subconscious thing, but I do worry, I think we all kind of do. You don't want to put out a book where everyone goes, I mean, we talked about actually imposter syndrome the other night. I don't know what order we're releasing this in, but I think one of the things that makes you worry as an author who's put out a number of books and sometimes does have imposter syndrome and thinks, really, no one's noticed that I actually can't really write a book yet. Somehow it's been a fluke that all the people that have read my book have just been, maybe they were on drugs or drunk when they read the book. And, they're like, wow, this is great. And, you think maybe the publisher was on drugs. Anyway, I think the more like you go along though, there's that worry that the next book you don't want that book to be the one that everyone says. Because, like all of us have got authors that we've read for years, right? And we love. And I feel like inevitably there's always going to be one book where you just don't love it as much as the books that you've read of the other author. You know what I mean? Like, I'm sure you've got favorite authors that you think that. As an author, it's probably something stupid to think about. You don't want the book you're currently writing to be that book. But at the same time, I feel like that's probably a stupid worry, because it's not necessarily that a book is bad. It's that readers take, their own emotions, their own journey that they've had, a whole load of things into it. So whereas one book person might say, oh, that's the worst book Rachel has ever written, somebody else might read it and say that's absolutely the best book she's ever written. So these are all worries that, I think are there the more you write, but they're probably, we really have to just push them aside and try not to let them, bother us when we're writing and we're editing.
Because otherwise you'd be paralyzed and not be able to do anything whatsoever, because that will consume a lot of energy, having that much doubt, particularly when you're in the middle of writing a manuscript and there's already a lot going on, just in terms of trying to keep track of story. And sometimes I'll sit there and think, what is this? What have I got myself into? How am I
I think that all the time. And, also I think, and this is veering off possibly the editing course, but, when you first get an idea, hopefully you're excited about it for some reason and you think, oh, this is actually possibly going to be the best thing I've ever, written. You kind of like have that joy. You think, finally, I've got to have this breakthrough book that, and then you're halfway through and you're thinking, what is even the point of this book? Like, why would I think that this was a good thing? So you really have to get beyond all of those sort of thoughts, or you would never finish anything, right?
Oh, that's absolutely true. So once the manuscript's been delivered, I think it's always a tender time, right? Like you're handing it over, and off the back of all of this energy expended, time put into it,
you're scared,
the doubts, and I'm very fond of saying writing is blood and earth and gristle. It's not scented candles. Like I think is it as we're all wafting along and it's all lovely. It's like, actually sometimes it feels like I'm slicing open a muscle. So you send it off, and then the void. The void while you wait for the feedback.
You have to wait for a few weeks. I mean, I think this depends on so many different things. Like if you're not published, so let's, you may have to wait months to hear, and up to a year, it's you do have to learn a lot of patience. Then when you're published, ideally there's a little bit less time, but still all your, your publisher, editor, whatever, they've got lots of people that they're, working with and receiving from. But you are that's the only book you're thinking of is yours, and you're thinking, oh my gosh, maybe they haven't replied to me because they think it's terrible and they don't know how to tell me that it's terrible. But in reality, they probably just haven't had time to read it yet, right?
And from the publishing side,
you'd have an example there.
Well, I will talk about the fact that I know some writers who haven't been published yet wonder whether they should pay to have a professional edit done on a
Oh,
manuscript
yeah.
before they send it in.
Good
And
question.
look, it's lovely if you want to do that. I tend to think if you are going to a freelance editor and getting a structural report on a manuscript, you need to know what to be able to do with it. Like you and I know what to do with it because we've been through a few. I've been an editor as well, still edit manuscripts that I'm publishing. So it's great if you know what to do with that report, but that requires a bit of experience. And so I think it can be tricky because it's a significant investment of money and time.
Yeah, I've heard people say that they feel like now that's expected and that they don't have the money for that. Like I've heard aspiring writers would say. But it's interesting because I always worry about people doing that beforehand because there's so many people out there that are saying, hey, I'm a structural editor, or I can give you a manuscript assessment. And I mean, anyone can say that that's their job. Like there's no, so you have to be really careful probably as well in terms of looking for someone who has actual proper experience and knows what they're talking about, would you say as well?
Yeah, you should always take a recommendation if you can get one, but I will also say you don't need to do it.
Definitely not.
The best structural editing device for someone who's submitting to agents and publishers is time. And by that I mean you write your manuscript, put it away. Like put it away for as long as you can stand, and then go back to it, and you will see things. Now, if you don't see things, then possibly you have no business writing.
Yeah, that's so true.
Anything you and I see things, and other published writers see things when we go back to our manuscripts. Even as you're saying, you might read what you've done the day before. I used to do that. I haven't done it for the last couple of manuscripts. I'd read what I wrote the day before, and that's purely because I haven't had enough time.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. It does take time. And if you're riding on the train or whatever, or the ferry, and you've only got half an hour, then you can't waste all that time rereading what you've done before.
Yeah. So I don't tend to, I will, having said that, I will sometimes do it just in a big chunk, but I will always see things. Everything that I've written the day before, if I'm reading that, change that, do that. Oh, make a note that's happened.
Yeah. So, and that's only a day.
Yeah, that's only a day.
If you can give it a few weeks, a few months even, you'll definitely, so I agree, time is more important than getting another manuscript assessment. The other thing I worry about a manuscript assessment too, and I'm not saying that they're not good, they're not a good thing to do, is that what if, like so I'll give you an example. I have written the first 22,000 of my next rom-com kind of thing. My agent has read it and my publisher has read it. They gave me completely kind of different feedback in terms of, one of them said, this is like the best thing you've written so far, and I like it even better than Bridget, and there's absolutely no feedback I've got so far. Like and then the other person said, I'm not really sure about the main male character, the love interest. Is there enough tension? And they probably the answer probably fits somewhere in the middle of there. But what worries me about a manuscript assessment from someone completely outside of, say, the publishers that you're submitting to or the agent you're submitting to, is that you might be told to do something that is actually the opposite of what, say, a publisher would want you to do. So it might be taking you further away from it.
And that can even happen when you are getting published during the editorial process, that people can completely opposite sets of feedback, contradictory sets of feedback. So no, editing is a matter of opinion. It's not a dictation to you as to what to do, or it shouldn't be that. So if you do go and get a report done, consider it a matter of opinion if you know what to do with it. But yes, time and patience are invaluable. If you can spend some time away from your manuscript, then go back to it and try to look at it with fresh eyes if you can. And that's where the time comes into it, because you will have forgotten some stuff. There are things that I see in my manuscripts when they come back that I think, I cannot at all remember writing that.
So funny. Yeah.
So time will help with that, because sometimes it does come out in a fugue state and you don't remember writing it. So a bit of distance on it is great. And then you need to have the courage of your convictions, and you need to hold your nerve when you're submitting. And you also need to realize that it may not be that manuscript, and that if you do not get a positive response from publishers and agents, it could just be that it's you haven't written a good enough manuscript.
I know, I can say there's a couple of things, isn't there? That's a good, let's touch on, I mean, we'll get to the structural edits and copy edits of how we feel about them in a second, but I think that's really important in terms of what I see now. And I've said it before, I've got nothing against indie publishing or self-publishing, whichever way you want to call it. I know some people who have done it, you know, so successfully, and their books are amazing. A lot of those people just to like have had to, you know, the publishing world is hard. They've lost contracts for some reason, but they've already been published before, and they, you know how to approach editing and know how to approach these things themselves. And they're writing good books, but just for whatever the reason, they didn't sort of take off in the market, and now they're doing that. And then there's others who are in a niche market kind of thing, and they wouldn't have been picked up traditionally because of that, but they're really good writers. But I do think, and then there's people who just want the control over it, right? And they like the business side and the marketing, and they want to be able to release the books when they want and stuff. But I do think one of the dangers is that people will get a rejection from a publisher or an agent, and they'll think, was that person no? Or they'll get a rejection on their manuscript from all the publishers. And I don't know about you, but I had plenty of rejections before I, you know, got my first contract. And I'm glad that those books were rejected. There was reasons they were rejected. They weren't good enough. Some of them I got feedback and explanation. Some of it was just no. So this, if you get a rejection, I feel like, and you might think there's more reasons. So, but I can think of two, and feel free to add. Your book is either just not the right time, not place, and that person, you know, there's reasons the publisher may have picked up something similar. Like there's luck, or they just don't think they'll sell enough copies, even if they think the story's really good. It's just not going to be working for what, you know, there's those kind of reasons, but the book's good, but it's just not right for them at the time, right? But the other reason, probably more frequently, I'm guessing, you'll be able to say this, is that I said, it's just not good enough yet. We need time to learn. I had 15 years. Some people maybe take less than that. But like, I do feel like one of the dangers of self-publishing is that people rush to get published because they can.
Yeah.
Whereas, you know, well, I guess it's what you want. If you just want to see your book out there and you don't really care, then that's okay. But if you want to make sure that you're learning and writing the best book you possibly can, then sometimes there's a reason your book's being rejected, and maybe put that one aside and start something new.
Yeah. Because what I see,
any other reasons, would you say?
Well, what I see working in the publishing industry, as I have done for a very long time, is that unlike with music, say, so I'm also involved in the country music industry as a hobby, but quite involved. So I've seen a lot of stuff to do with music and musicians. I find that with writing, there is a belief that just because something has been written, it deserves to be published.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of amateur musicians like me who have no expectation of a record deal. I'm not expecting even to get gigs at the local cafe. I can play guitar, I can sing, all that kind of stuff. I'm doing it for my own entertainment. For some reason, writing isn't seen as being something
that's so
for
true.
one's own entertainment. Instead, there's this idea that if it's been written, then it must be published or it's not worth anything. And I'd like to challenge that, because if you have written something to express yourself, you want to get something out of your mind, off your heart, whatever it is, then that's the act in and of itself is valuable, and that's fine. It doesn't need to be published in book form. You could put it on social media, you could put it on a blog. Then when I started writing about country music, it's because I wanted to express something about music. I didn't know if anyone was going to read that. I still was going to read it, but you know, I wanted to say something and put it out there, and I did. And happily, you know, there are people looking at that now, but yeah, it's just that whole idea of putting this worth on it, like it's only worth something if a publisher or an agent has said that it's worth something, but it depends on it being in the right format for the right people at the right time, and the planets really have to align, I think.
That's so true. There is such a huge element of luck.
Yeah.
I guess that's why it's hard as a new aspiring author to go, is it because the planets didn't align, but I have got something that's worth putting out there? Or is it that I actually need to, you know, develop my craft, write a few more books, learn my voice and all that kind of stuff?
Well, sorry, go on.
No, it's okay.
I was going to say, I've just published a book called Servo by David Goodwin. I am.
Oh, yes. Thank you for sending me.
Oh, great. I'm glad to have. I know I was the agent for that book. well over a decade ago. I
Wow.
tried to get it published several times. I got close at a couple of publishing companies, but it did not happen. David ended up sending that manuscript to the Ashet submissions inbox, otherwise known as the slush pile, colloquially the slush pile. I actually look at our submissions inbox. I don't know in other publishing companies where that's the case. I used to look at it at a different publishing company when I was a baby editor, and that's who's looking at it. But I do look at it. So anyone who's submitting to Ashet, it's me looking at it.
So you only look at the nonfiction?
I look at the nonfiction, but I'll look at anything that comes in, actually. We don't have fiction open at the moment, but I do tend to look at that and have found things in there in the past for the fiction publisher. So he addressed the email to me because he said, I bet that's who's reading this email. And he was right, it was me. And happily, I've now been able to become the publisher of that book. Now, he said to me he is very glad that book was not published.
Oh, interesting.
I originally had it because he said the time and the distance on it has made it a much better book. He's been through several drafts. He was redrafting it. So after I stopped being an agent and moved into the publishing side, he was redrafting it. So by the time I saw it again as a submission, it was a different manuscript. And then between that time and publication, he changed it quite a bit.
Redrafted again.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. So let's get to that.
Okay.
So we've talked about our own edits.
Yes.
What do you like? How do you feel about the editing process with your publisher? I mean, and how does that work for you guys?
Well, I find it, I don't find it as traumatic as I used to. And I think that's just because I've been through a few now. I used to brace myself for getting it. I learned to take Panadol before I rented it because I knew it was going to be upsetting. It's still disconcerting, and partly it is because I have an editorial background and I tend to think I should know better. And I've realized that I'm saying this to myself. We've talked about the Gretchen Rubin 4 tendencies framework. You've discovered you're a questioner. I'm an upholder.
I don't know if I am a questioner, actually, because I got the information about it and I'm like, I'm questioning whether that's...
Maybe that proves the point.
Anyway, keep going.
But as an upholder, like, I feel like I should have done a better job. It's just, I always get that report and think, well, you're a failure. You should have known all of that stuff. You thought that you had it right when you sent it in, and clearly you haven't. They've sent you this report with all these things to do.
Yeah.
It is a necessary part of it because we can't see everything, obviously.
Yeah, totally.
In terms of practical application of report, what I do is print it out.
Yep, same.
There you go. And I will go through it and I will underline the action points, for lack of a better term. Then I will put a number against them.
Oh.
I will go, okay, so for everything that's underlined, there will be a number next to it. Then I will handwrite a list on a separate piece of paper with the numbers. And I will just put a brief description of what the action point is, and I'll refer to the page on the report where it occurred.
Okay. Yep.
So then I work my way through the list. So I go back to the manuscript and I work my way through the list.
So when you get a structurally edited report, like a structural report, like I've just held up a letter that tells you all the things, you know, it's that lovely, this is a great manuscript, blah, blah, blah. And then these are all the things that are
the sandwich, yes.
And then, and then at the end, oh, I can't wait for the next draft. It's like such a great book, you know, blah, blah. Anyway, when you get that, do you also get, so like my editor sent me this structure report. For anyone watching us on YouTube, you'll see me holding up. This is actually, it's interesting because this is quite a short one. But my publisher or editor for my Harlequin books, he writes a great like synopsis first. And then he gets into, well, first he writes a letter to say, you know, what he enjoyed and blah, 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 blows me up. And then he writes a synopsis. Then he kind of gets into the nitty gritty. But this is, I think, about 7 or 8 pages. And it's probably one of the shorter ones I've actually had. But he also marks up the manuscript at this stage too. Do you get that too?
For this edit I did, previously no. And I do find it useful to have the manuscript marked up as well, because otherwise I will sit there going, now, which part am I going to? Especially if chapter numbers aren't given.
Yeah.
So it is really handy, any editors who are listening, it is very handy if you can actually mark that up in the manuscript as well. Then we can see exactly what you're referring to. Because sometimes it can be character-based feedback and you're not sure
whereabouts
exactly what's prompted it. So
I do something quite similar to you. So I'll go through the report. I will print it out. I will underline stuff and write some notes and that. Then I will go to the manuscript and I'll do all the really easy things. So I go through once, just kind of clicking like anything that's really easy to do. I'm just trying to think of an example, but like, add a tiny little bit of description here. I don't know what this. Then I'll go and do those simple things, but reading the comments on the bigger things as I go, so they're kind of in my head. And then I do what you do. I write down like the things that I've taken from the manuscript. I don't put a number next to it. But then I kind of like it's scribbled out now. I've, like as I've done it, tick things off. So yeah, I go through the manuscript probably, depends, I'm being honest here. Like this book, I've got less time. So I've gone through the manuscript once and done the easy like changes that I could do. Then I've gone through again with the bigger things and the things that I've written down. Usually then I would probably go through again, but I'm really not going to have time to do a proper read through of this one. But I know that I'm going to have copy edit stage again. So like, do you read? So I feel like I don't need to do a complete read through at every single edit stage, but it needs to be done at some stage. I don't know about you, how you feel.
Yeah. So when I was saying I work through the list, I do work through it the way you do it. So I will look for the quick things to do first.
Yeah.
Like description, add some description here or whatever it is. But then any large movements of text or something that requires chucking out a whole chapter or writing chapter, that I will do, unless I'm in it and I think, oh, okay, I can do that now because I'm in now and I'm feeling the impetus to do it now, so I'll do it now. But I do think it's more satisfying to be able to tick a few things off or cross them out in my case, and then get back to the heavier work, also because the heavier work requires some thinking time.
Yeah, exactly. Another thing I'd ask you, because there's been a couple of, I think one of the things often readers think is that we have to do every single thing that is suggested in an editorial report. And I kind of like, I'm lazy, right? I want everything to be perfect. So what's the laziest tendency? Because that would tell.
No, I don't think there is a lazy, like in Gretchen Rubin's framework. No, I don't think there's a laziest tendency at all. I don't think any of them are inherently lazy.
I mean, people go to me when I say that, you're not lazy because look at all the books you've written. So what I mean in that, I think anyone is stupid if they don't believe this. You want it to be as perfect as you can, like the first time, right? It'd be great if we could just, like even you said, like, you write a draft, you fix it yourself a bit and it's perfect. That would be great. In an ideal world, that would be awesome. But as we've said, that is never the case. There's always ways to improve. But so some of the stuff's really easy, right? It's like, okay, yeah, I do need to add a little description there, or okay, I can see that I haven't really shown the background of how these characters connect, or, so I'm doing the 6 in a series at the moment and I've randomly put people in there so that readers that have read the series will be happy, but then people who haven't, he's like, well, how does this person relate to this person? So that sort of stuff is kind of easy, and you might be annoyed that you have to do it, but you're like, okay, I just got to get over it and just do the work, right? But then there's sometimes there's really big structural suggestions that people have asked, or not even massive. So I would say if there's something that I read and I go, nah, I don't like that, like I don't think that's right, I then always have to, and I'll give some examples because that might interest people, but I always ask myself then, do you not want to do this? Because actually, like, it's a domino effect. If you change something, even if it's a small thing, it can actually, change almost everything else, because you've got to go and then, it's a domino effect. So I asked myself, do you not want to do this because it's going to be hard work changing this? Do you not want to do it because deep down you feel like the way you had it is actually the better way for the story? And now sometimes if I decide that it's just because I'm lazy, then I'll force myself to address it and work through it. If I decide it's because I believe what I have for the manuscript is actually the better way, it might not be exactly there yet. I'll have to, obviously what I've thought is not completely working, but I'll lean towards keeping it the way it is, but fixing it, if that makes sense, rather than. So that's one question I really always ask myself. Do you not want to do this because you're lazy, or you do not want to do this because the book is actually, you think, hey, had it's better? And I'll give a couple of examples, one rather big one. I'll give the small one first. So my book, Just One Wish, is about a woman who goes on a cruise with her grandmother and her mother, and her mother and grandmother are two very different people. One's like diehard feminist, and one's a like happy housewife on Instagram. Like she's, and the main character has two love interests. And I was obsessed years and years ago with the people that wanted to go to Mars. Did you hit like the yeah, right. So you had to apply. It was called Mars One, and it's a program, and they had thousands and thousands of people apply, and they chose 100. And then out of the 100 people, not everyone was going to go to Mars, but it was the Mars 100, and they were going to get training and all this different stuff. It ended up being, stopped. I think it didn't go ahead. But I remember thinking, oh, that's really fascinating. I want to write a character who is one of those people who gets one of the Mars 100 and has been chosen, and he's going to Mars, and it's a one-way trip. You're not coming back. So you're saying goodbye to all your family and friends forever. And so that's one of the love interests. Now, all books need conflict, right? But in romance, the core of like the main thing of a romance novel is the conflict between the two main characters and why they cannot actually be together, even though they're obviously attracted and perfect for each other in a lot of ways. And so I thought, this is perfect. Like, he's literally going to Mars. There's no, it's not like he's moving to another state or whatever. But my publisher was really adamantly against the Mars aspect. She said it's just too out there. Like, it's too weird. Nobody can relate to that, blah, blah. But I stuck by that. And a lot of people said they really liked that. That was a smallish thing. It was just no. Because she's like, why can't he be going to like Antarctica for a research trip, or America? I'm like, have you heard of Zoom? Have you heard of Skype? Have you heard of emails? Like,
because you can come back from Antarctica. Yeah.
You can come back. Exactly. So that was one. And then the other example was with the Patterson Girls, which was my first in sort of the general contemporary women's fiction. And there's a twist and I can't talk about it in case anyone wants to read that book and it's a spoiler, but there is a twist at probably around 75% of that book. It's a long book, and probably I could make it shorter now. I've learned a few things, but there's a twist at that point, and it's kind of I'm trying to work it out. There's a little bit of scandal in possibly that twist. It's like not what you necessarily read in mainstream fiction all the time. There's a little bit of, it's sort of a bit taboo kind of thing. Without. And my publisher was like, do we really need to go there? Do you know, like that? Can we just, can something else happen? Or can we even just finish the book at that point? And I was like, no, if you finish the book at that point, it's just a nice story. It's like, but there's nothing there's no twist, no challenge, or kind of no really investigation of what they're going through. Everyone's just had a nice kind of life. But she was really, really adamantly against what I had there. And so I remember sitting down in the back of we had a shop in the Gemelli in the Wheatbelt at the time, and I sat at I was working kind of in the shop, but I sat at the back in the office watching the till and making sure I went out, and I was trying to think, what's an alternative thing that could happen? Maybe someone could win lotto, maybe someone could die, maybe like all the different really life-changing things that could happen. And then, so I think I mentioned on an earlier episode with my Harlequin books, I have a publisher and also an editor, and the publisher had said, definitely, no, I don't want this kind of thing. And the editor then was going along with the publisher because he'd heard her first feedback and stuff. And so, but I rang him and I was like, or I sent him a message and I said, I have tried all day. I've come up with these two options. I don't love them. What do you think? Kind of thing. And he goes, give me half an hour. And he went for a walk and he rang me and he said, you're absolutely right. We're keeping it. He said, I'll go into bat for you. And he said, the reason we're keeping it, and I really wish that I'd kept this report or I had it somewhere or he'd written it to me, but he said there was 5 things and I can't remember what they were, but he said there was 5 reasons you need a twist at that point, and these are the things it needs to do. And what you have currently, which is the taboo thing, hits all 5 of those points, where the other options you've come, they each do 2 or 3 maybe, but it's not as strong. So that was a sort of a turning point for me in thinking about my own books and structural editing, because I could have gone, hang on, I'm just the author. These are the publishers. They know better. They know the market, blah, blah, blah. And I should be a good girl, like we've said before, and do as I'm told, right?
Yeah.
But I didn't. And that book was very, quite successful for me. It did win the ARBIA.
No, it was very successful. You don't have to say quite. It was very successful. Yeah.
And the ARBIA Book of the Year, as you would know, it's not just about the contents of the book. It's about the whole packaging, marketing, sales, a lot of things. But I genuinely think that book wouldn't have had the impact that it did if it didn't have that twist and that what I'd stuck for. So that really made me realize that with editing, like, you do have to sometimes stick by what you think is right. But at the same time, you really have to analyze why you think something should be the way it is. Is it because is it just because you like it kind of, or is it really working for the story? So that's the major thing that I think about with structural editing.
Yeah. And I think that comes back to something I said in a previous episode about ego versus essence.
Yeah.
So when the essence of the story is like, is it essential to that story, or is your ego talking where you're like, I just don't want to take that on because either I'm feeling lazy or I just fundamentally don't want to agree with the editor or the publisher at this time.
That I think I know best.
Yeah. So, and it is hard to sort out sometimes, particularly if you don't have practice with it. But I won't necessarily take on everything, and I rely on that kind of paradigm of ego versus essence, but it's more to do with the physical feeling. And that is, if I feel like a dull thud in my solar plexus, I know it's not right. When I read that recommendation and I actually have the feeling of like, it's like
a visceral reaction kind of thing.
No, not doing it. So, and it's pretty immediate. So I might read it and just instinctually go, no. And most of it I do take on board. So it's not as if I'm going through the list going, no, I know better. It's actually the occasion.
No, I take probably 95% on board, even if I don't necessarily want to, because it is hard and it means you've got to dig a little deeper. But I do think, it's that point where you have to protect. It's a really fine line between, so you have to really think hard. Because as you said, often the first reaction is, they just didn't get my book. They didn't understand what I was trying to do, or they're just not reading it properly, But when you can then go away and think about it, that's why, as I said, maybe doing the really simple stuff that isn't a big picture thing and it isn't changing the essence, or it's just developing kind of what's there. Doing that stuff first means you're being productive, you're getting stuff done, but leaving the sort of the stuff that requires a little bit more thinking means you get a little bit of, you calm yourself down, you lose that initial first reaction.
Actually, I've lost my train of thought. This happens sometimes. It's Saturday afternoon, we're talking, I can't even remember what I was going to say, but I think it's along the lines of no, I've lost it. I'm actually
all right. Well, so we've talked structural. Do you like editing? There's two questions I have for you. A, do you like editing? And B, if you got anything, like, do you do copy edits differently, or which stage of editing do you like? For anyone who's listening, maybe we should quickly just say, anyone who is a complete newbie or as a reader and is wondering what we're talking about in terms of structural and copy and that. Do you want to give them example? Explanation, because this is your business,
A structural edit is basically a bigger picture edit, looking at things like characters, plot, themes, setting quite often, although depending on the detail of the setting, that can come in the copy edit. But it's anything that's affecting how the story functions and whether it actually does function.
That's a good explanation.
It's pretty, even though it sounds like it's top line, it is fundamental, and it's likely where most of the work happens. Copy edit should happen after all the structural work has been done. So once you've had a structural rewrite, could be more than one, depending on how you're going and depending on what the feedback is. And I've actually just remembered what I was going to say, Rachel. So I'm going to drop at this point, because it does apply to structural editing as well, which is that editors are bringing their own context to the edit. So their life experiences, often where they live, who they're associating with, what they read, who they think the reader is, whether they have any sense of who your reader is, all of that is coming into their interpretation of what you've written. And that
So
is
true.
why we shouldn't ever accept it holus bolus, because
Mm,
they might have a completely different context from the one that you have as a writer and within which you've written it.
yeah.
So it is good to just have that sense of belief in what you've done if it's coming from the essential place and not from the ego place.
Yeah, that's so true.
And so when you approach, so the structural edit ideally doesn't take into account any of that, but of course it does, because we're all humans who live in the
Yeah,
world
we
and
can't
have
help
our
it.
own contexts.
Yeah.
So when I'm structurally editing manuscripts, which I still do, even though they're nonfiction these days, it is sometimes looking at those things more likely in the context of memoir or true crime when there's narrative involved.
Yeah.
So once all that structural work's been done, you then go to the copy edit, which is looking at things on the line. Now, that should not involve extensive rewriting or suggestions
Like
of rewriting.
deleting chapters or
Yeah.
removing characters or big picture things at that stage. Yeah.
Having said that, as the author, you retain the prerogative to do that. So
Yeah,
if
yeah.
you get a
I
copy
know,
edit
actually
back,
with Bridget, I did quite a big copy edit myself. It wasn't that it was like I could have done their copy edit reasonably quickly, but I ended up having similar thoughts like what you said and just thinking, oh, I don't reckon this structure is working. So then I had to actually do quite a lot at that stage, but that was all my own kind of work. Yeah.
And you do have the scope to do it at that stage, because it's the point at which you can still move text around. And that is because once it gets into page proofs, when it's actually typeset looking like a book, we don't want things to move around a lot at that stage, because
Yeah.
it can just upset things. You're more likely to introduce mistakes if you're doing a lot of work at that stage. So ideally, in that copy edit stage, that's
It's
when
your
you
last chance.
it's your last chance to do anything major. And a lot of work can take place then. So you were talking about using track changes for your structural edit. I cannot look at the sea of
I
red.
don't think I've done it all the time. It's interesting. I thought about it this time because my publisher or editor said, look, leave track changes on if you can. If you can't stand it, then don't. But I also, I think like if it was majorly moving around, like as I said, this was actually quite a lighter structural edit, where I've done other ones where it's like literally the whole thing would be track changes because I'm moving chapters and, deleting. So, but the other thing is a little tip that you can have track changes on, but like if you click the side, which I did by accident in the margin, it makes it like all the red go away. I don't know if you know. Yeah. So like it's there and it's tracking them, but you can pretty much remove them while you're
The other thing you can do is not track the changes, but then do a compare/merge on the two documents later, so that you've just written it without any changes being tracked, but then or your editor can do that themselves. But if you want to deliver a tracked changes document, just do a compare on the one that was sent to you with the one you've just done, and it'll show all the tracking, and you send that in as a separate document.
Great tip. Any tips at copy edit or proofreading stages? Like, do you print anything out? So because I would say with Harlequin, and I don't know if this is my publisher or whatever, because it might change from other people in the company and HarperCollins, but I never got a printed page proofs, like never. I would often print the book out at copy edit stage for me. Like once I'd done all my stuff, I'd print it out and then do a final read through. And I often would see a lot of things and change and then put them in. But with Penguin, they send the page proofs and, you've got the chance to change things on there, only little things as you've said. But yeah, so do you print at any stage or?
I won't print the edit, I print the pages. So the edit I don't print just because it's done on screen anyway, and just figure, if I print it out.
I'm amazed how much I changed then though.
In the edit?
Yeah, I think just reading it on paper, like when I'm reading it that way, sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, that sentence is so pedestrian. Like, do I really write like this? Like, and I have to also remind myself though that don't hate on myself too much at that stage, because I think that every time, yet, the book ends up okay. So it's just kind of the way I'm reading it, I think. And but yeah, so I do print it off usually at least once during the process. Yeah. Not environmental friendly.
I've never been tempted to print it off. I look, if it were going to be printed, I'd like the edit therefore to be done by hand.
Yeah.
Which it's not. So I don't really want
You didn't have to then go back and put it into the computer and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, so I don't want to look at those track changes printed out. So when I get the pages and that's a nice, clean looking.
So does Hachette send the pages
No,
printed
I
out?
print them out.
No. Yeah.
And I will pick up things then just in terms of detail usually that I did not see in the copy edit or that no one has seen in the copy edit, because I do think the eye works differently.
It does, definitely.
On the
And
hard
that's also, I've heard other people say that they read it out aloud.
Oh, right.
Do you do that? Anything like that with your work?
I'm not, no. I only read out loud actually when probably applies to my own work, but when I'm editing other people's for punctuation. So if I'm not sure where comma should fall, yes, I'll read the sentence aloud, and where the pauses naturally fall is where the punctuation goes. So if it's a short pause, it's a comma. If it's a longer pause, it's a semicolon or a colon, depending on what the sentence needs.
Yeah.
Then a very long pause is a full stop. And I do recommend that for
That's a really good tip.
Who's editing their work. Yeah, because we tend to forget that the written word is documenting what was originally oral storytelling, and those so it's essentially documenting that process, and therefore the speech pauses I think should be reflected in the written
word. No, I like that. That's a really good tip to have.
That's my own feeling. Other people may disagree, and there is a trend at the moment I've seen amongst editors to obliterate the comma as much as possible, which I find slightly annoying.
And it's also funny because I find feedback from readers sometimes. They're like, oh, there were so many mistakes. And then it's just because the comma is not the way that they, like, everyone's got their preferences of how to use a comma, isn't it? The Oxford comma versus the, what's it? Anyway.
Yeah, well, the Oxford comma gone apparently, but
because I was in that era at school where they didn't teach you any grammar. There was about 10 years in Australia where they just decided not to bother. Yeah, so it was quite a long time, I think, in terms of they just were like, no. So I find all that quite, I've got people who are either younger than me or a fair bit older than me who can tell you what each thing is actually called, all the different types of punctuation and grammar. And as an English teacher past, I feel completely incompetent in anything like that because we just weren't taught it.
Well, I learned grammar studying foreign languages. So I studied French for many years and Japanese, and that's where I was hearing terms that I had not heard.
Yeah.
In my school.
It's also to learn a language sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's good for reasons. But
we've almost talked for almost an hour again.
Well, there's a lot to talk about, Rach.
There is, especially with editing. I mean, it's a major part of our job, really.
Yeah. And you'll possibly like this because I think we all might be like it, but there will always be things that we want to change. So it doesn't matter how late in the process. And that's why sometimes you just have to walk away. Think I'm not looking at that again because there will be things in there I want to change.
And the other thing is, I think that, the very final stage is proofreading, as I've said, and other people do that, and then we get the chance to look at what they've done, or at the same, that's another interesting thing with Harlequin. I've always looked at the proofread after the proofread has done it. Right. I don't know how you work at Hachette, but with Penguin, we did it side by side. Right. So I got to do the proofread on the pages and write my stuff and then send that back at the same time the proofreader was, and then they sort of merged it together. Yeah. But what's always, so we'll ask you how you do it in a minute, but what I find is interesting is the most annoying thing is you'll get a book, you'll get your first books. This is not my book, but you'll get your box of books and you'll just pick it up and you'll flick it through, and then your eye zooms in on a mistake. Right? No matter what you do, there is always one or two mistakes, and you'll always get emails about the mistakes. Most people will say, I would be a great proofreader because I always find the mistakes. What I find really funny usually with those emails is that they've usually missed one of the mistakes that someone else has found. So we all, unfortunately, no one's perfect. And we want those mistakes not to go through. Every effort is taken to make sure that the book is mistake-free. So that is one of the infuriating things. Yeah,
and because the eye does glide over certain things, and often the mistake is a participle, and it's something that our brains filled in for us, and everyone's brain in the process has filled it in.
Just does it, yeah. And things that spell check won't pick up because it's not actually a mistake. Sometimes it's the wrong word spelt slightly you know, it's that right word but spelt the other way, or, you know, different
Yeah.
things like that.
There was one book where I had a few messages about a book that about a word that everyone was convinced was a mistake. It wasn't, and I had purposely written 3 L's into it for emphasis.
Yeah, yeah.
What had happened with that manuscript was that when I'd originally written it, I'd italicized it to make
and it changed.
When the manuscript for that book went to the typesetter, they dropped out all the italics.
Oh no, I love italics.
No one realized until I got the copy edit back, and I noticed that film titles had been marked up by the editor for italics. I'm thinking, wait a second, I know that I italicized those film titles. And then I went through a random selection of the text and realized that all the italics had dropped out. So everything I put in as emphasis, every foreign word, every title for
all dropped out.
had all dropped out. And I had to spend, I think, about 8 hours going through everything to put it back in.
And one was missed.
And one was missed, which was that one. So
on that, I mean, I know we should wrap up in a moment, but on that, 2 things I want to ask you about as someone who is on both sides of the writing, publishing fence. I love italics, right? I always get some taken out because, so I love italics for emphasis, and then for the reasons that you've said, obviously. And I love exclamation marks. But obviously, you know, you're supposed to use them with extreme, what's the word I'm thinking? Right.
Judiciousness, I guess. Yeah.
Like only, you know, if you absolutely need to use an emphasis, an exclamation mark, right? So what's your thoughts on it?
I love both of those as well. And I think it's because, and this is, they're mainly going to come up in dialogue when you're writing dialogue, because we're trying to reflect how humans speak. And we do put emphasis on certain things, unless you're speaking where there's no emphasis on any particular syllable. But we do put emphasis on things, and we do exclaim. And the exclamation mark one is interesting because I do think that's got a context as well, which is that, and I think it's particularly applied to women writing things, which is that you shouldn't be taken seriously if you are using exclamation mark.
Yeah, I've heard that recently as
like,
well.
oh, well, clearly you're just being too flighty or whatever it is. Like, is that the case, or am I just expressing excitement? Because I use them a lot in emails, because
so do I. Yeah,
to put some levity into the email, otherwise it can sound really serious. And italics for the same reasons. Like, I want to make the rhythms of that speech clear, and if I don't use the italics, then I possibly have to use some extra words, but those extra words wouldn't be used in real life, and I'm trying to write realistic dialogue.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, all right.
So keep your italics and your exclamation marks, and I will too, Rachel.
Do you know what I have also done occasionally? And I do, and the first time I did it, I thought, oh, I'm going to get in trouble for this. Is it question mark, then an exclamation mark?
Or the interrobang.
Yeah, oh, that's what it's called. See? I love it.
I think the interrobang has its place, and it's fun.
What's it called? Right? The interrobang?
The interrobang, apparently. That
is a really good word.
But yeah, it has its place. And again, it's because of speech, right? So sometimes
my cat is down here sneezing. I don't know if everyone can hear.
The cat is sneezing at the very idea of the interrobang. But sometimes in speech we're asking a question, but there is that it's like a inflection plus. Yeah. So you need the exclamation mark as well.
I've learned something today. Interrobang.
Yeah, there you go.
We need to call this episode the interrobang.
Interrobang. I'll make a note of that. The interrobang. Got to put my glasses on to write that down.
Well, we should probably wrap up.
We should, because you have things to do before you go
all
overseas.
The things edit. Yes. Yeah. But what have you got on this week? Anything exciting?
Well, in my day job life, I'm running behind doing proofreading, because I do proofread the books I publish as well. So I read it at the start and end of the process. And,
is there another proofreader that does that too?
There is, but I like to do it. Just to see what's going on. And sometimes I will pick up things that can get missed during the editorial process for whatever reason, or it's something that the author and I might have discussed and I know that's important to them, and somehow it's gone amiss in that process. So I'll just pop up at the end and say, I think XYZ needs to happen. So a bit of that, and my head is a to-do list, but I can't think of anything in particular at the moment. Your to-do list is to get you overseas.
Yes. All right. Well, thanks for the chat. I hope everyone liked our editing episode. And don't forget to send us your questions if you want us to answer anything.
Particularly if it's anything about editing, we can do a part deux.
Yeah, true.
Well, Rach, happy travels, and I'll see you soon.
Thanks, so. Bye.